The funeral wasn't even over when my late husband's children surrounded me. One of them slammed a folder onto the dining table and said, "We want every dollar, every property, every asset Dad owned." I looked at all three of them, smiled quietly, and said only one sentence. "Are you sure that's what you want?" They laughed. 10 minutes later, the family lawyer walked into the room, and every smile disappeared. If you love emotional family dramas filled with betrayal, shocking twists, and satisfying endings, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Now let me tell you how greed destroyed a family in just one afternoon. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 58 years old. My husband, Richard Collins, was the love of my life. We were married for 29 years. Richard had 2 children, Daniel and Rebecca. From his first marriage, I never tried to replace their mother. I simply respected them, loved them, and hoped one day they would accept me. They never did. To them, I was always the second wife. Richard became seriously ill 2 years before he passed away. Cancer, the doctors tried everything: chemotherapy, surgeries, experimental treatments. Through every hospital visit, every sleepless night, every painful treatment, I never left his side. But Daniel and Rebecca rarely visited. Sometimes months passed, without a single phone call. Richard noticed. But he never complained. He simply smiled and said, "At least I have you." The day Richard passed away, my world stopped. For hours, I sat beside his hospital bed, holding his hand. The nurse quietly whispered, "I'm so sorry." I couldn't even answer. 3 days later, the funeral was held. Friends, neighbors, business partners, everyone came. Daniel and Rebecca cried in public, accepted condolences, spoke about what a wonderful father Richard had been. But something felt wrong. Very wrong. The moment the last guest left, Daniel closed the front door. Rebecca folded her arms. Their younger brother Michael placed a thick folder on the dining table. Daniel looked directly at me. "We need to discuss Dad's estate." I stared at him. "The funeral ended less than an hour ago." Rebecca shrugged. "So? There are important things to settle." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Daniel pushed the folder toward me. "We've already prepared everything." I opened it. Property lists, investment accounts, bank balances, company shares, every single asset Richard had ever owned. Then Daniel calmly said, "We want every dollar." Rebecca added, "Every property." Michael finished the sentence. "Every asset." I slowly looked up. "And me?" Daniel answered without emotion. "You can keep your personal belongings, but everything Dad owned belongs to us." My heart broke, not because of the money, because after burying their own father, greed was the first thing on their minds. I quietly asked, "Is this really what your father would have wanted?" Rebecca laughed. "It doesn't matter. We're his children. We deserve everything." I gently closed the folder, looked each of them in the eyes, then smiled. "Are you absolutely sure that's what you want?" Daniel smirked. "Completely." I nodded. "Good. Then let's wait for Richard's lawyer." The confidence on their faces grew even stronger. None of them realized that Richard had spent the last 6 months secretly preparing for this exact moment. Nobody spoke. The room was completely silent. Daniel leaned back in his chair with a smug smile. Rebecca crossed her arms confidently. Michael tapped his fingers impatiently on the table. They looked certain they had already won. I simply poured myself a cup of tea, then waited. Exactly 5 minutes later, the front doorbell rang. I stood up calmly. "That must be him." Daniel frowned. "Who?" I smiled. "Richard's attorney." A tall man in a navy blue suit walked into the living room carrying a leather briefcase. "Good afternoon. My name is James Harrison. I've represented Richard Collins for nearly 20 years. Everyone shook his hand politely. Then James looked around the room. "I assume everyone is present." Daniel nodded. "We're ready." James slowly opened his briefcase, removed one sealed envelope, placed it gently on the table, then said something none of them expected. "Richard instructed me that this envelope must only be opened if there was a disagreement over his estate." The room became quiet. Rebecca laughed. "There isn't any disagreement. We already know everything belongs to us." James looked directly at her. "Do you?" He carefully broke the seal, pulled out several documents, then began reading. "If you're hearing this, it means my children have already begun arguing over what I left behind." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Rebecca's smile faded. James continued. "Before anyone receives a single dollar, I want everyone to hear my final wishes." Richard's words filled the room. "To my beloved wife, Margaret, thank you for never leaving my side. You stayed through every surgery, every sleepless night, every painful treatment. You loved me when I was at my weakest." Tears rolled down my cheeks. James paused, then continued reading. "To my children, I loved you more than you'll ever know, but love is shown through actions, not words. Daniel lowered his eyes. Nobody moved. James turned another page. For 2 years, Margaret cared for me every single day. My children visited only a handful of times. I kept a record. Daniel suddenly interrupted. What record? James calmly reached into the briefcase again. He placed a thick binder onto the table. Inside. Every hospital visit, every visitor log, every phone record, every caregiver schedule. Richard had documented everything, every missed birthday, every ignored phone call, every canceled visit, every lonely holiday in the hospital. The evidence was impossible to deny. Rebecca whispered, This isn't fair. James looked at her. Your father wanted facts, not excuses. Michael quietly closed the binder. None of them could look at me anymore. Then James unfolded one final document. This, he said quietly, is Richard's final will. Daniel immediately smiled again. Finally. James looked directly at him. I wouldn't celebrate yet, he began reading. I leave my wife Margaret the family home. All investment accounts, all company shares, all company shared, every vehicle, and complete control of my estate. The room froze. Daniel stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. What? Rebecca shouted. That's impossible. Michael grabbed the papers. There has to be another page, James calmly answered. There is, and I suggest you listen carefully. Daniel's face turned pale. For the first time, they realized. Their father hadn't forgotten them. He had simply made one final decision they never saw coming. The room was completely silent. Daniel stared at the will in disbelief. Rebecca's hands trembled. Michael slowly sat back down. None of them could believe what they had just heard. James folded the document carefully. I'm not finished. Daniel looked up. What else is there? James removed one final sealed envelope. This letter was written by Richard himself. He instructed me to read it only after his will. James unfolded the letter, then began reading. To my children, if you're hearing this, you've already learned that I left everything to Margaret. Before you judge me, you deserve to know why. The room became painfully quiet. Money never interested me. Character did. During my illness, I wasn't testing who loved me. Life was. Margaret never left. She missed holidays, lost sleep, held my hand during every treatment. She chose me, every single day. I lowered my head. Tears rolled down my face. James continued, My children, you were never too busy for your own lives. You simply stopped making me part of them. Daniel covered his face. Rebecca quietly began crying. Michael couldn't even look up. Then James turned to the final page. However, this isn't punishment. It's my final lesson. Everyone looked up. Margaret already knows that every asset I left her is legally hers. Only she can decide whether any of you receive anything. Daniel looked at me. His confident expression had disappeared. For the first time, he looked afraid. He slowly stood. Margaret, I'm sorry. Rebecca shook her head. No, we're sorry. We should have been there, Michael whispered. We thought we'd always have more time. I looked at each of them, then quietly asked, Are you apologizing? Because you lost the inheritance? Or because you lost your father? No one answered, because they already knew the truth. James closed the file. The estate now belongs entirely to Mrs. Collins. You may leave whenever you're ready. Daniel slowly turned toward the door, then stopped. I'm ashamed of myself. Rebecca quietly nodded. So am I. The three of them walked out without saying another word. 3 weeks passed. One rainy afternoon, someone knocked on my front door. It was Daniel. Alone, no expensive suit, no legal papers, no demands, just flowers. I'm not here for money, he quietly said. I just wanted to apologize. I failed Dad, and I failed you. For the first time, his apology sounded real, not rehearsed, not desperate, just honest. Over the following months, Rebecca began visiting every Sunday. Michael volunteered at the cancer center where Richard had received treatment. Slowly, the family Richard always wanted started to exist, not because of his money, because of his final lesson. 6 months later, I invited everyone to dinner. After the meal, I stood up holding a folder. Daniel looked confused. What's that? I smiled. It's my decision. I opened the folder. I've created the Richard Collins Family Foundation, a charity that would provide financial assistance to families battling cancer. I had donated a large portion of Richard's fortune in his name. Then I looked at his children. I've also divided the remaining inheritance equally between the 3 of you. Daniel's eyes widened what Rebecca whispered. After everything we did, I nodded. Your father wanted to teach you, not destroy you. If I kept everything, I'd only be proving that money mattered more than family. That's not the legacy Richard wanted. Daniel began crying. I don't deserve this. I smiled gently. None of us deserve second chances, but sometimes we receive them anyway. For the first time since Richard's funeral, the four of us embraced, not because of an inheritance, but because a broken family had finally started to heal. Today, people often ask me why I shared the fortune instead of keeping it all. My answer is always the same. My husband didn't leave me his wealth. He left me his wisdom, because houses can be sold, money can disappear, businesses can fail, but the values we leave behind can change generations. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes family is worth more than fortune. And always remember, the greatest inheritance isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives you change with the love you leave behind. The end.